This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And hello, welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm the host, Kevin Randle. I will be joined momentarily by Robert Sheaffer. We'll be talking about the latest congressional mandate for UFO investigation. We'll be talking about the deep state and other UFO-related issues. I did want to say one thing before we started. Last week, I talked a little bit about people reviewing books and magazines and doing things like that when they haven't bothered to read them. They base it on, I guess, the personality of the writer or the owner of the magazine or whatever. And I was talking sort of about a preemptive strike, because I know that my background is going to be under assault because it's been under assault for literally decades. Was I really in the military? Was I really an intelligence officer? Was I really a helicopter pilot? Did I really go to those schools? Are those schools accredited? And on like that. And at this point, it just becomes absolutely wearing. And the one thing that kind of popped into my mind as I was thinking about that is that's sort of the equivalent of the cancel culture, ufological cancel culture, I suppose. If you do not embrace everything in the UFO field, then you are considered a bad person. You are considered an agent of the CIA, a member of the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. And it doesn't matter which side of the ufological fence you fall on, those allegations are going to be slung at you. I always thought it was kind of funny. You knew you'd made it in the UFO field when they began to accuse you of being CIA. I was once accused of being a member of Hector Quintanella's Project Blue Book. And I'm thinking, how could that be? When Blue Book was closed down, I was in the Army, not the Air Force, and I had just returned from Vietnam. Prior to that, I was in high school, for crying out loud. I had no opportunity to be a member of Project Blue Book or anything like that. The one thing that was kind of funny, though, I did grow up in Denver, Colorado. At the time, the University of Colorado was doing their investigation for the Air Force. And a friend of mine who was also very interested in UFOs, we never really went to the University of Colorado to find out what was going on. We just sort of followed the flow, I suppose. But the real point here is ufologically, I just do not embrace, this is the word I was looking for, embrace many aspects of the field. I don't think crop circles are extraterrestrial. I don't think cattle mutilations are extraterrestrial. I'm very bothered by the nonsensical abduction stories we read, with a couple of exceptions to that. The idea that there's been 300 or 400 UFO crashes is preposterous, because if that had happened, we would be having a wholly different conversation. I think if there's a UFO crash, there may be two, and one of them may have been an emergency landing as opposed to a crash. And maybe Robert and I can chat about that in a little bit. I am joined by Robert Sheaffer. He's been on the program before. He is a hardened skeptic, a student of Philip Klass, I might say. I don't know if Robert remembers, he and I once went sailing on the Potomac River with Philip Klass. Many, many years, I think it was 1977 was when that happened. He did found the Skeptics organization there in the San Francisco area. He was a writer and a columnist for the Skeptic magazine and things like that. So we've talked about skepticism and ufology a number of times. So Robert Sheaffer, welcome back to A Different Perspective.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, well, you certainly do have a different perspective than some of these people, huh? And I'm sure I do too. But yeah, I've been accused the whole thing of being CIA and whatever. it was Skeptical Inquirer I wrote for, not as I wrote a column for, not Skeptic, although I did contribute a few articles to Skeptic. But I've kind of distanced myself. I've resigned from any such organizations. They all got so political to me, you know, and I just can't. I can't see it doing things their way. But you
Well,
know, the so-called science is, you know, follow the science. Well, what is the science, you know? But anyway.
well, I
but
always
getting
wondered
back
about
to,
I always wondered about skepticism in the fact that no matter where you are, if a theory is proposed, the skeptic should be skeptical of it. And in ufology, I thought many times skeptics embraced any explanation for a UFO sighting, even if it didn't fit into the real framework of the evidence, not necessarily meaning it was extraterrestrial, but the explanation didn't work. And I always wondered about them not taking their skepticism into those explanations, saying, well, you know, this really doesn't work for this sighting because.
well, it does, that you're right, that does happen sometimes. Fortunately, I guess from my standpoint, it's not something that happens a lot. I have, you know, sometimes there are private communications when a publication receives, you know, an article, and they want to get input from other skeptics. And I have seen some of these that are pretty odd. That you know, somebody said that the what was it? The Socorro UFO was a landed UFO, was actually a mirage of the star Canopus in the daytime. And you know, well, you can imagine what I had to say about that. And
We're skeptical.
yes, yes, especially when the explanation you're proposing is almost as extraordinary as the UFO, the extraterrestrial thing would be. And there have been other explanations. Somebody had a big theory about how, you know, that famous Coast Guard UFO with was it 4 little elliptical UFOs looking out the window, that everybody pretty much agrees, I think, that those are reflections of lights from the inside.
Oh, you mean that that 1952 photograph taken in Massachusetts?
That's right. That's right. Somebody came up with the idea that those were reflections of sun on oil tanks reflecting up to the clouds, and this would, you know, require a certain very dark clouds, very low but completely clear where the sun is. And I ran a little experiment with a paint can, which would be almost the same as the top of those oil tanks. In fact, theirs probably wouldn't reflect as much as the top of my paint can, and it does not produce this nice, you know, perfect circle. It produces, you know, scattered light. So I mean, yeah, there are proposals like that, but I like to think that we as skeptics look at this and you know, hopefully stay with the good explanations and abandon the bad ones.
Well, one of the things I noticed frequently is that many skeptics were unwilling to say, well, we don't have a good explanation. We don't know what it is. Not meaning that immediately translates into it was extraterrestrial. It means, given the evidence we have, given the circumstances we have, we don't have a good explanation. I always wondered why many of them were loath to suggest that we just don't know, why that would be an answer you couldn't give.
Well, you could give, but then you'd sort of be putting the onus on yourself to go out and get more information and see if you can find more information. Often, you know, we receive accounts of a case where, you know, it all sounds very remarkable, but we just really don't have enough information to say, you know, like, when did it become visible? How was it seen? And so on and so on. And, you know, if we knew more about it, likely, I think we'd have a better idea what it was. But I don't, you know, but you're right. One can say that. Well,
the Air Force would often say, well, we have insufficient data for scientific analysis.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's true in many cases. But, you know, I would agree with you that as far as Project Blue Book, I mean, sometimes their work was good, but sometimes it was really stretching it. You know, they would say that, you know, Venus would be pretty much everywhere. And And temperature inversions. A temperature inversion might explain a very small number of cases. I think, like when people are looking over, for example, when the people look over the Great Lakes, when they look over Lake Michigan from Michigan looking west, sometimes the mirage, the superior mirage, causes the lights of Chicago to appear to lift themselves up above the horizon. It's just a refraction phenomenon. Normally, you can't see that far, but when the conditions are just right, you can. And so, but there's only in those rare cases that an actual temperature inversion could result in a so-called UFO. And like in Menzel's books, he's, somebody sees something up there, and well, it was probably a temperature inversion. Well, I don't think it was that. It might have been something else, but it wasn't that.
Well, since you brought up Menzel, I just want to mention Clyde Tombaugh, whom I know you know who it is, the man who discovered Pluto,
Right.
astronomer of some note, had a UFO sighting in Las Cruces.
Yes.
And Menzel explained it as a layer of haze in the atmosphere that were reflecting the square windows of the houses, lighted houses around his backyard. And of course, Tombaugh said, well, no. Tombaugh said no. And I'm thinking, Tombaugh's there. He's an astronomer. I'm going to go with his, I don't know what I saw, as opposed to Menzel's explanation, who was not there, would explain everything by some magical means.
This business about the reflections off the windows sounds as bad as the business about the reflection off the tops of the oil tanks on the clouds. Not very plausible at all. No, I read a little bit about that. I haven't read a lot, but from the description that Tombaugh gave, it makes me think that what he saw was the same thing that what people call the Lubbock lights. Fundamentally, that there was likely a birds going over. But and I've seen this myself. If you just catch it briefly out of the corner of your eye, or you just see it for a second or two, it looks very dramatic. But if you don't see it appear and see it disappear, you may not catch what it is. So I suspect that that's the case, but I can't.
And I would argue that only because Tombaugh's wife believed that there was an object. The lights were on a singular object as opposed to singular lights. So they had a divergent, if you will, of their description of what they had seen. Yeah, I don't know what they saw. It
happens, yes.
It didn't seem like it was a normal UFO sighting. What they were describing, it was just some bizarre atmospheric phenomenon. But they did have a little bit of a divergence on what they had seen.
Well, we see the same thing in this, the Phoenix lights. The first, there are two phases of it. The first phase and then the second phase, which was clearly the flare drops from the Air National Guard. But the first, the so-called triangle, flying triangle, some people reported it as, a solid object, and they saw a solid object, at least in their perception. Others said it was, 5 lights. And we actually have that short video of it that shows that they're not fixed with respect to each other. So they were independently moving objects, probably A-10s come in the Air National Guard from the, Project Snowbird. They were flying in to Davis Mountain Air Force Base in Tucson from probably Las Vegas. And because everybody was out there to look at the comet that was out there, the Hale-Bopp comet at that same night, and as these things went over with their formation lights on, people said, "What's that?" But the point being that, some people saw it as a single object with fixed lights, and other people said it was independent lights, and that appears to be correct. Other people saw it in the telescope or binoculars and said they were A-10s.
I thought it was interesting that the Air National Guard finally copped to have dropped flares, and when you superimpose the terrain on the film, you can see why the lights were winking out. They were dropping behind the mountain. So I think clearly the flare explanation is a good one. I know you wanted to talk about UFOs in the deep state, and I want to talk about the latest congressional mandate to investigate UFOs and the creation of this new office and what you think about that. So, but we'll have to do that in just a moment because we're going to have to take a short break here. And I do want to mention, for those of you interested, my blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And the latest book is called Level Land, which is all about the level land sightings. And I know that's going to excite Robert just no end. I'll promise not to
read it then, huh?
There you go. There you go. So we will be talking about those topics when we come back. And there's some other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Go to XZBN and take a look at the program listings, and you'll find something that'll excite you. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. And welcome back. I am sitting here. Actually, Robert Sheaffer is not here in my studio, my office, my house, but he's far enough away. We're doing social distancing to keep ourselves healthy.
I'm in suburban San Diego.
There we go. When we went away, we had talked about some UFO sightings and things like that. I want to get to the latest congressional mandate, the creation of this office to investigate UFO sightings or UAP sightings or whatever the new acronym is today.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
Well, I suspect it's people, since ufology has been a long time, and you and I have been around it a long time, we know what's been done before. And I suspect that these people who are pushing this are relative newcomers, meaning 10 years instead of maybe 40 or 50 years knowledge and experience of ufology. And we remember Project Blue Book. Before that, there was, special, or coming from that, there was a special report 14 from the Battelle, and they tried to analyze the data. They were the first ones to use the newfangled stuff like punch cards and computers to analyze reported characteristics of UFOs, and that really didn't prove much of anything. We all know what happened with Project Blue Book, and of course they had, what was it, Project Grudge and Project Sign and whatever before that. And of course, Blue Book ended up with so much hot water for the Air Force that they ended up, they basically just give it to the University of Colorado, and here, you guys figure out what this is, and we'll have nothing more to do with it. And they looked at it, came to a skeptical conclusion, and as far as the Air Force was concerned, that was pretty much it. So, and it's not just them. I mean, there's many different countries. In France, they had Japan, and you have, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And I just can't see how anybody thinks that all we got to do is have the Pentagon create a new office. We all know how efficient and how transparent these guys are. Not that is, and they're just going to get themselves in all kinds of trouble because sooner or later, when they make their report, they may say, well, we had so many sightings and whatever the number is, and here's the percentage we couldn't explain. And then the people will say, what, you couldn't explain it? Why? Oh, there must be aliens. It's just going to be this whole Project Blue Book thing over and over again. You remember what the kind of flack that the Air Force was getting over that. And then finally, this the whole University of Colorado thing would just get this out of here, give it to somebody else. Now they're taking it out again. And I'm sure that 5 years or 10 years from now, they'll be regretting it.
I think of two things. Number one, the conclusions for the University of Colorado study were written before the contracts were signed. And I think it's a letter that Phil Klass may have gotten his hands on as well, where they said the Air Force, Robert Hippler wrote to Robert Lowe at the University of Colorado and says, here's what we'd like you to find. There's no national security implication. The Air Force has done a good job and nothing can be learned by further study. And we should stop the whole thing. And that's exactly what the Condon Committee concluded. So, I mean, it was kind of a put up job, but the other thing I noticed in the congressional mandate they were only going to investigate military sightings. And how transparent can you be? Because you can drop the umbrella of national security over any of that stuff. Say, well, we can't talk about that setting because there's national security implications.
Right, exactly. And this is why a number of the UFO proponents are suggesting that they don't like this idea of having its office in the Defense, National Defense Authorization Act. They'd rather have it as like a congressional investigations, which, you know, would be more open in the sense that, you know, these investigations everybody would see and would be able to listen to. But the point is, that's not new either. There were, what, 2 series? Was there one in the House and one in the Senate? Something like that back in the 60s. And they were basically inconclusive. Got a bunch of people in there to testify. You got Hynek, and was Friedman, I think, was in on that. And, you know, all the major ufologists at the time. And it still didn't settle anything. It didn't, you know, nothing new was learned. We didn't know any more about UFOs after that than we did before. So I'm thinking that this is just deja vu from people who really don't know the history of UFOs and UFO investigations very well, and that nothing good in the sense of new information or something we didn't know is going to come from it. And I suspect after a couple of years, you know, the government is going to be like, oh my God, how did we get into this?
I always think of this as Twining 2.0. You remember Twining's letter from September of 1947, where he said the phenomena is something real, not illusionary and fictitious, and we should do an investigation, and it should be a priority investigation, and it should have a security clearance and that sort of thing. And this is what strikes me as going on today. They're saying the same thing. Well, it's something that's real, and we've got to investigate it. Clearly, there are sightings. That's something real. Doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial, as some people have. I think gone with the Navy said, well, these were real cockpit recordings, meaning that they were real alien spacecraft. And it doesn't mean that at all. It just means the video really came from the Navy.
Right.
But they look at this stuff and they think they're going to go somewhere else. But we're in the same place we were in September of 1947. We're going to start a new investigation. It's going to be in the intelligence function, the intelligence operations in the Pentagon. And I think the Director of National Intelligence is involved. And yet they also said, and we're going to investigate military sightings. So a really great sighting by civilians would be ignored because they couldn't control the information. They say, well, that's not part of our purview. We're dealing with these military sightings. So I think it's basically a big put up job for some bizarre reason.
Right. It's hard to see how anything good might come of that. But you know, on the other hand, if the military started started investigating everybody's sightings from everywhere, then that would, in essence, sort of create the perception that somebody, you know, in the government is responsible for explaining these things. So if you go out and see something that's flying and it's a kite or whatever, but you think it's an alien spacecraft, and then you report this to the military, then the military has to investigate and find out if you saw a kite or something. I mean, this could just grow would grow exponentially. So in that sense, they have to do this way.
Well, I think you can set up criterion that would eliminate the kite flying. I've always said, if you've got an airplane flying at night and the guy's got his landing light on and you go out to let your cat in at 3 o'clock in the morning and you see the thing flying over and the wind is blowing the wrong direction and all you see is a bright light crossing the sky, there's absolutely no way that the military or anybody's going to be able to solve that sighting. It's just a bright light in the sky seeing at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if it's a private plane and he's flying under VFR rules, there's no record of it. So that sighting is unidentified, but it's clearly not an alien spacecraft. And so I think you can set up criterion where you look for, you have to have certain specifics, you know, how long was the thing in sight? Well, if it's under a minute, we're not interested in it because you don't have a time to make a proper observation if it's under a minute. You know, are there more than one witness? If there's multiple witnesses, then you've got something better to go on. You have not just a single perspective, but dare I say it, a lot of different perspectives. I thought I'd get a plug in for the show for no apparent reason. But you know, the point simply is, if there's photographs, you've got something else to work with. And I think that you can set up the criterion, but to eliminate just to the military, what you've done is now set up a way of keeping all the information under the hidden away under the umbrella of national security. And I think that may be what they're looking for.
Right, and that is the criticism that's being raised by a number of ufologists. And I think there's something in that, because you're right. We on the outside will never know for sure what's going on the inside. But the thing is this, now we have seen already, they've had this UFO task force for a bit now that they've been looking at this since, I don't know, 2 years or something. And what have they found? What have they given us? Let's see. This object that's called the Go Fast. It's one of the original 3 videos that Tom DeLonge and his crowd first showed us, and then later the Air Force released it. It's just like a little round, a very small little dot, and it's airborne. It's either a large bird or a balloon. But the point is, these guys are in a jet, and they're going to 400 miles an hour, whatever speed that thing goes at. They're looking down, and they're saying, "Wow, look at that thing move." Well, it's moving, behind them. Well, anybody who's taken high school geometry can figure out what's happening there. If I'm riding in a car and I go past a tree, looks like the tree is moving backwards, but I know the tree is not moving backwards because I can see the ground, and I understand that. But if they're up in this plane and they're looking down and they see this object that appears to be zipping behind them at a high rate of speed, that's just their forward motion crossing something, that is itself a very slow moving, almost stationary object. They couldn't figure this out. What kind of experts couldn't figure this out? Seriously.
I think one of the problems is they were required to make a report to Congress on June 25th. And I thought of it as a really poor high school report, maybe a C-, maybe a D+. It wasn't a very good report. There were 144 incidents, or 144 reports. What does that mean, reports? Is that several reports on one incident, or is it 144 separate events? What are you telling us here? I think what happened was they had the mandate to make the investigation, and the people in the government just kind of ignored it because they didn't care. And all of a sudden, the news media is very interested in the coming of this report. Now we've got to put something together. So they slapped this thing together, and that's what they ended up with. They were supposed to do another report on October 25th, and that never happened. We never heard a word of it. Instead, now we have this congressional office being created.
Well, yes, it's doesn't make much sense, but
well, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about the operation of this might being, or let me rephrase my question here. I kind of got ahead of myself, and I know I'm running short on time. We'll have to come back to this. But I have postulated in a book cleverly called UFOs in the Deep State that there was a manipulation of the data, whatever that data may be. Well, let me put it this way. Do you believe that there's a deep state or a shadow government, something like that operating? What is your opinion on that?
Depends on your definition. Some people say the deep state simply is all the unelected bureaucrats who have essentially lifelong tenure, or in some cases not lifelong, but for the duration of an appointment, which still would be several years. And that they are the ones who are really making things happen. The president or whoever may, say do this or do that. Perfect example is so-called resistance to Trump. If you remember, there was a big story a short time, a year or so after Trump became president. There was a story in the New York Times talking about the resistance. I am the resistance. And basically, it's people who are not elected. They are bureaucrats, but very high-ranking, important people who basically said, we oppose Trump's policies, and so we're not going to follow them through. That, I think, is the deep state. You can't deny that something like that exists. Now, are they a shadow government? I don't know really what that means. I wouldn't say that, but I would say that there are people who are sitting very fat and comfortable in DC or wherever else their office may be, and they basically can get away with a lot of stuff. And some of them, use it for their own advantage and enrichment, or others try to advance policies that they personally favor, but may not necessarily be favored by the management above them. And the management might not even be happy doing, to know what if they knew what these people So yes, in that sense, there's a deep state, and but I don't think that they're opposed to UFOs. I think that some of them at least, seem to like them, seem to be promoting the idea that UFOs are significant.
Let me come back to that in just a moment, because I'm going to have to take a break here. I'm talking with Robert Sheaffer. We've moved off into the deep state and bureaucracy of the government. And I think it's an interesting place we need to go to explore that a little bit further. Once again, my website is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. The latest book is called Level Land. The one before that was UFOs in the Deep State. And we will be back right after this. So please stick around. I am back with Robert Sheaffer. We are practicing social distancing for apparently no good reason whatsoever. That's just my opinion, and I've put it out there for cancel culture to come after me now. When we went away, we were kind of talking about the deep state, and I mentioned my book, UFOs in the Deep State, and the postulation there was, and I don't know if you know this history or not, Robert, but back in the 1930s, once FDR was elected, there was a group of individuals, industrialists, maybe conservatives, who tried to get a Marine Major General put into the White House as a chief of staff, and he would really run the government, and FDR would be a figurehead. And they were attempting to manipulate the government to create this kind of a deep state where the elected officials really weren't running the government, but they were controlling it from behind the scenes. The New York Times investigated and Congress investigated, and they all said there was nothing to it. And they came down heavily on the general, Smedley Butler, I believe his name was. He would have been the only man to have ever earned 3 medals of honor had Marine officers been able to earn medals of honor when the first one would have been awarded to him. He ended up being awarded 2 others. So he was quite a respected general. He had quite a following in the 1930s. The veterans organizations of the time had quite a strong following as well. And they thought that they would all follow him. They would all follow General Butler. So they were attempting to set this whole thing up. And Butler just was horrified by the idea and went to the press about it. And the press kind of savaged him about it, and the Congress savaged him about it. But what he did was, if that was really true, then he stopped the whole thing from going forward. So the idea of the deep state, I think, came about out of Turkey in the 1920s, or maybe a little bit earlier, where you have a shadow government running things. The elected officials really don't have the power. It's invested in the bureaucrats, and a lot of the bureaucrats you see are there from in the United States, from administration to administration. Sure, the secretaries in the various departments are appointed by the president, and some of them show up. Some of them that were in the Clinton administration are showing up now, and that sort of thing. So you've got this continuity there, but at the higher levels of the bureaucrats, who are not political appointees, can operate on a level to conceal or hide information. And I was of the impression of, and this is where I think, Robert, that it kind of explains the UFO situation, because the deep state's whole purpose is to protect their power and their money. And by admitting that UFOs are extraterrestrial, they are kind of undermining their power. And we take a look at human history. When a technologically superior civilization contacts a more primitive civilization, that primitive civilization ceases to exist, not necessarily conquest or warfare, but the mere introduction of the technology undermines the societal structures in quite a different way, and changing those societies. And I think that when you talk of the Plains Indians, for example, a clay pot is a wonderful tool for cooking a meal, but a steel pot is a much better tool. And the Indians didn't have a methodology the Plains Indians specifically, didn't have a methodology for creating the iron pots or the steel pots. And they had to rely on the European technology to get them those sorts of things. So it kind of undermined their civilization. So that's kind of the structure of the idea, is looking at how can the deep state prevent the president from getting information. And I think we're seeing a bit of an example of that. I had postulated, if I'm the president at one point, if I'm the president and I go to the director of CIA and I say, tell me everything you can about UFOs. And the CIA director says, well, no, I can't tell you. You're not cleared for that. My next move as the president says, you're fired, bring in your deputy. But I think what happens is the president goes to him and says, I want everything you have on UFOs. And the director of Central Intelligence says, we need to put together a comprehensive report for you, Mr. President. Let me get with some of the other members of the intelligence community and some of the military people involved in this, and we'll put together a comprehensive report. And somehow it never gets done. They can drag it out. Conflicts develop, crises come about that divert attention, and they just keep massaging that thing until that person is out of power and the next guy comes in and he may not care about UFOs, so they don't have to do it. So I think they dodged the bullet that way. But I think the deep state is manipulating the situation for their own purposes. I think that's where I get into the UFO aspect of it. That's kind of a short take on it, Robert.
I don't think I would interpret it that way. You seem to be suggesting that the deep state somehow knows that the UFOs represent an alien technology and that it's threatening to undermine what we know, and that the more of a lid you can put on the knowledge of UFOs, the stronger their own power will be. I don't think that's true at all, because first of all, let's look at who's promoting UFOs these days. Okay, well, you got Christopher Mellon, right? Now, is he part of the deep state? He's certainly, I mean, in this whole thing, this whole milieu of the, politically correct, long-term, Washington, denizen. He's a swamp creature, okay? And what was Harry Reid, the late Harry Reid? Okay, he's another swamp creature. And let's see, who else we got here? John Podesta. He ran Hillary's campaign. He's a big ufologist. He's a UFO promoter. He's a swamp creature. So, I mean, it looks to me like there's probably just as many of these deep state types who are promoting UFOs as there are who are trying to put the lid on them. In fact, probably more, because I really can't think of any that I know of anybody who I would consider deep state trying to put the lid on UFOs. I think that the way it works, at least as I interpret it, is we said that, these deep state people feel themselves to be very powerful, that they receive instructions and directions from above, from their management, and sometimes they follow it and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they do things that are completely just not authorized, not necessarily wrong, but unauthorized, putting, having little things. For example, this whole AATIP that everyone's talking about so much, a Pentagon program was supposedly headed up by Elizondo, had a budget of zero. And this is according to James Lukatsky, who we know was the head of the AAWSAP, which is this other thing. That's the Pentagon program that funneled $22 million to Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems. And what we got from it was 38 papers on weird science. And it works out to something like almost $600,000 a paper, which is really nice work if you can get it. But Lukatsky has said very plainly that Elizondo's budget was zero. So if we think of Elizondo as one of these guys who is also a swamp creature, and he was interested in UFOs, didn't have a budget, but him and I guess some of his friends would meet from time to time, and they would call it this, AATIP or whatever. But as far as there's no budget, there's no mission statement, there's nothing like that. So I think that people basically, when you give people power and they want to do things, and I think they can get away with it, they're going to try to get away with it. So he thought, Elizondo, and I'm sure many others thought, gee, the government's got to be studying these UFOs, so let's kind of do this on our own and see what we can do. So yeah, that kind of thing happens. But I think the deep state is just as much, at least as much, probably more pro-UFO than anti-UFO.
Well, I would suggest that we mentioned Christopher Mellon, for example, being a
Yeah.
big UFO guy.
Right.
What has he accomplished?
He's accomplished. Well, he's gotten on all these TV shows and all these interviews and news programs to talk about how wonderful, Tom DeLonge is, and is to the stars and so on. And now that that's kind of gone away, dried up and blown away pretty much. I don't know exactly why, but it happened rather suddenly. Now he's, on his own and doing other things. But yeah, I mean,
Well, my point simply is some of the people that you mentioned really haven't done anything to promote, to add credibility to the UFO phenomenon. They're associated with Tom DeLonge, and you're kind of looking askance at him, and it's the same thing that's been going on forever. Let's kind of be dismissive of the whole UFO phenomenon. And I don't think Christopher Mellon has done much good, but he's done a great job of promoting himself. But you could say the same
that's
thing.
what I'm getting at. Not just promoting himself, but his idea of ufology and what research and investigations should be done. That these people are promoting their idea of it. So the question, I don't think, is, is his research any good? Is his analysis any good? He's not doing research or analysis. He's basically promoting, as all these other people who are, and affiliated with, Bigelow has got a lot of money, and he's into far out stuff, not just UFOs, but survival of after death and so on. So, I mean, there's a lot of money being put into this sort of thing, and everyone knows that the government, especially the Pentagon, has a lot of money. So they figure, well, that's the best way to get to suck on the government tit, is to get a defense contract for $22 million to study advanced aerial weapons or something, the AAWSAP. Basically completely useless stuff about anti-gravity and warp drives and stuff, but the government sponsored that.
But that doesn't really take us to extraterrestrial intelligence. It doesn't take us to solving the problem of whatever
Absolutely
the UFOs
not.
are.
It doesn't solve anything.
Yeah, it moves us in a different direction. It moves us away from the key issues of what we need to do and what the investigations to do. And I mean, I can go on the internet and put together some very technically oriented papers about anti-gravity, and I know virtually nothing about anti-gravity, but it looks good and it sounds good, but it's diverting attention away from where we might need to be looking. It's the old magician's trick. Don't look over here, look over there. And while you're looking over there, I pull off the magic type thing. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is going on here. We've got, you mentioned Harry Reid and his $22 million to his pal, Robert Bigelow.
Yeah.
That seems to be financing part of Bigelow Aerospace or whatever his organization is. And it has nothing really to do with UFO investigations, although you kind of hide it behind that veil a little bit.
Yes, I think it was a special division or something he had. It was Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Research or something. So yeah, it was supposedly a separate entity there.
Well, I mean, that's my point, that the people that are now coming to the forefront of the UFO field are the same people who have been running around in the background for a long time, but they have never really accomplished anything telling us anything about UFOs. And that kind of brings me to Avi Loeb. You're familiar with his Galileo project?
Indeed, I am. And in fact, I just wrote the most recent entry on my blog yesterday. Was, I think, the second or third piece that I had written on there. They have now taken Jacques Vallée onto under their wing. He's not just a research associate or whatever they call it. I understand he's like a project scientist or some such thing. So they brought on Jacques Vallée at an even higher level than these other guys like Nick Pope, and who else have they got on there?
Christopher Mellon.
Right, Mellon and Elizondo, I think they got.
Yes.
Yeah. Or as Kurt Collins commented, it looks like Galileo project looks like it's trying to create its own version of Contact in the Desert. which is a far out UFO. It's this conference that they hold every year out in the desert, and they invite far out people like Eric von Daniken and so on to speak there.
And now far out people like Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
You take a look at, did you read his book on Trinity?
I haven't, no, I have not, but I understand it's really terrible. I included a quote from a reviewer who basically says, it's hard to believe this is the same Jacques Vallée as has been writing these other books for so long. But really,
let me interrupt you there, because I'm going to have to take a break. We'll talk about Jacques Vallée and Trinity and some of this other stuff in just a moment. Your website, your blog is Bad UFOs.
Bad UFOs, yes.
So take a look at Robert Sheaffer, Bad UFOs, and you can read in depth about some of this.
Yeah.
And we will be back right after this, so please stick around. We are back. That is Robert Sheaffer and I. We are talking about UFOs, and we were talking about Avi Loeb's Galileo project and the recent acquisition of Jacques Vallée. You had not read Vallée's book. Are you familiar at all with the
Right, the book is called Trinity that he co-authored with Paola Harris, and it's about a supposed UFO crash 2 years before the Roswell crash that was witnessed by, I don't know, 9-year-old kids or something like that. And they found some material that is, well, gee, it's a material and it's a little bit odd, but so what? So, yeah, I haven't even gotten to that thing yet, but I've read some of the reviews, and they're even from people who are usually fairly favorable towards Vallée. They think, oh my God, what has he done this time? This is it seems to be rather credulous. But again, I can't give you a lot of details about that. I'm sure others could talk about it better. My concern, though, I want to say about the Galileo project, I really don't understand exactly what they think they're going to accomplish here, because he seems to think, Dr. Loeb seems to think that it's just a question of setting up some cameras in some places and with proper software and the proper filters and whatever to capture UFOs and solve the mystery and find all these alien things. He's assuming that aliens have sent probes to the Earth, or at least to our solar system, presumably aliens from a very long time, very long distance, over distances of light years. And in fact, even more strange than that, he's saying that there's these objects, alien objects, that would be flying in our atmosphere, generating heat signatures that he then would get his cameras to record the heat signatures. But they would have to be within 10 kilometers of this so-called alien thing. First of all, if any object is coming in the atmosphere and is moving at a high rate of speed and generating heat and a heat signature, it's losing energy, which means it's falling to Earth. And if it doesn't, like a meteor, exactly, like a meteorite. And if it doesn't fall to Earth, then that means it must be powered and ready to go up and zoom on. Now, you're trying to tell me, or he's trying to tell me, that there's aliens 10 light years away who have sent this thing over here. They powered it. Well, how did they refuel it? If, after they make their first little hot rodding through the atmosphere and they use up some fuel, how do they replace it? Do they have an interstellar filling station somewhere? I mean, this whole thing, it makes no sense. You couldn't, objects that are in orbit around the Earth are not stable for long periods of time. Small objects, especially, because, perturbations on the moon and the planets and all that. And they wouldn't be usable over, shall we say, geologic times. We would have to assume if the aliens are a long ways away in their own solar system, they would have to send something here that needs zero maintenance, like the Maytag repairman who's just sitting and being bored. This thing would have to work for thousands of years, millions of years unattended.
I think that's the point.
This proposal makes no sense to look for something that couldn't possibly exist.
having talked to him a couple of times about this and have interviewed him on the program, so I have a little bit feel for what he's going. His idea is that an alien civilization may have sent out just literally hundreds or thousands of these probes, not necessarily directed toward our solar system, but throughout the galaxy in a search for other intelligences. And the idea is it wouldn't be necessarily getting near Earth. He wanted to remove, and this is what kind of trips me up. He wanted to remove the human element from the observation. So these stations he's setting up, these telescopes, would be gathering the data through the computer programs that they've arranged without the human interpretation of it. I had suggested that it might be beneficial to look at the history of ufology to see where it's gone. And
Exactly.
There are things that were done. The idea for the green fireballs and the investigation of them, for example, I think would be useful for him to understand how that operated and what the mistakes were.
1950.
And that would eliminate some of that problem. But he's looking for things that he's looking up into outer space, not necessarily on things that are coming to Earth, but passing by Earth at slow speed.
He wrote in the Scientific American piece, and I quote that in my recent blog piece, he was talking about objects, alien objects that are maneuvering inside the Earth's atmosphere. But that's part of what that's not everything he's looking for. But you're right. He's also looking at things that might be out in our solar system. Now, this so-called Oumuamua, or however you say it, that came, this was probably, we know about rogue planets, and I would say this thing could be described as a rogue asteroid. In other words, something in some far distant solar system had a gravitational encounter with something like Jupiter, or a very large planet, which flung it out, and probably repeated encounters that flung it out at sufficient speed to cause it to leave its own solar system. Now, we know that this thing arrived from the direction, we would say from the direction of Lyra, the constellation Lyra. It didn't come from the southern hemisphere. So it did not come from Alpha Centauri, it did not come from Epsilon Eridani or any of those. There is no really close star in that direction. The closest would probably be Vega, maybe some very small star. But anyway, the point is that this thing had to have come from at least 10 or 20 light years away. We know that when it was outside our solar system, it was moving at the speed of 26 kilometers per second, which is approximately the speed the Earth orbits around the sun. Now, and then, of course, as it enters our solar system, it starts to accelerate, but then it gets around the sun, and then the gravity pulls it around, and it goes back, essentially goes out in a different direction. But here's the thing. That thing must have been traveling for at least several million years to reach us. Now think about that. That thing, Oumuamua, was out there in interstellar space, traveling along, chugging along, like, you know, the tortoise and the hare, the little tortoise crawling through interstellar space. And now, if I'm an alien civilization, I can say, well, I'm going to send this thing out, and in 10 million years, it'll reach that solar system over there, and I'll see what's in there. I don't think so. Maybe there are aliens who think in these terms. And if he's talking about, well, they just send them out everywhere, they send them out this or that, how many probes is that going to be? And are you going to wait 10 million years for each one to send back its information? I mean, maybe this is something like building a pyramids or something for some alien race. I suppose that's possible. That, you know, it's their idea of reaching immortality or something. But if you just think about the sheer number, you think of how large our galaxy is, not to mention other galaxies. How many probes would you have to send out to all these places to look for intelligent life? I don't think it's feasible for anything, but what do I know?
I've always got the impression that the alien civilization, whomever it might have been, it was sending these things out kind of on a random basis, looking for it. You know, we've got the Earth-based SETI program where we're looking at various stars on a kind of a random basis for some kind of signal that there's intelligence life there. And that was my impression, not unlike the Voyager that just left our solar system after 50 years of flight.
Yes.
They're talking about in 80,000 years, it may approach another star system. And so it's that kind of thing. It's a long-term project. And we don't know the basis of if there are alien civilizations doing this, what their life expectancy is. Do they have any kind of way of tracking these things, or is it, kind of like what we did with the Voyager? It just we just sent it out with no real expectation of it ever, after it completed its mission in the solar system, no real expectation that it would
Right.
communicate back with us.
Right. It had its mission here. And then when that mission in our solar system was completed, it's just going out there. Good luck. Well, maybe in a million years, some alien might find it, but probably not. No, if you just consider the size, incredible size of our galaxy. And if somebody wanted to just send out randomly to different solar systems, how many solar systems are there? How close do you have to get to the star? If I will point something this way and the star is over here, I mean, how long is it going to take to get there? Is it going to get in the solar system? It's I think you're just conjuring up an impossibly vast scenario of alien probes before there's even the slightest chance of anyone passing through our neighborhood.
Well, I think we can agree that what passed through our solar system was some kind of an extraterrestrial artifact that didn't originate in our solar system. And I think that's an important thing right there.
It is, and I agree with you. And they say, well, we propose studying these things. That's part of their project. Well, I agree. Anything that's comes along that we don't know what it is, let's study it. I suspect it was an asteroid from a different solar system that got ejected and just happened to wander by this way. But that ejection happened several million years ago. Didn't happen just now. And so I put that into perspective. Maybe there's an alien headquarters somewhere where they're just listening for millions of years to say, well, did this probe come up with anything yet? Did this probe get anywhere yet? I don't think so. But it's an interesting thought.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand the distances as well. If you don't have some way of moving beyond light speed, you've kind of limited what you can do. And clearly, these things weren't moving anywhere near light speed. So
this thing was moving at 26 kilometers per second.
Yeah, precisely.
Space, which is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years between solar systems.
And I think that Dr. Loeb understood it took at least hundreds of thousands of years to get here. It did
at the very least.
Yeah, at the very least. So it was interesting that he got the kind of response that he did from people. But then when you look at the ufological aspect of it now, where he's bringing in the ufologists, I just wonder about the credibility of those people. They all have. Most of them have connections back into governments. If you look at Nick Hope, of course, being with the British Ministry of Defense, and you've got a number of other people who had ties to our governments as well. You just wonder what is the motivation of bringing those specific people in. I would have thought Jerry Clark would have been a great person to bring into it because of his vast knowledge of the history of ufology.
Yes. Is he still alive?
I think he said the same thing about you.
Yeah. No, I haven't heard or seen much of anything about Jerry. I guess he's having a quiet retirement somewhere, I guess. But what do I know?
Well, listen, we're out of time here. I appreciate you taking some time here to chat with us about all these bizarre projects going on.
Don't we get in a plug for my book?
I was going to say, tell me about your book. Where can we get it? And tell us about your blog.
Well, you can get it on Amazon or other booksellers, and it basically covers cases, skeptical perspective on some famous cases, the Phoenix Lights, the so-called Roswell slides, mystery missiles off the coast of Los Angeles, and gets into Betty Hill and the star map and all that stuff. So there's a lot of information in there.
And your website once again is
Bad UFOs. You can just type out badufos.com and it should forward to there, or it's badufos.blogspot.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate you taking your time to chat with us today.
Okay. Well, my pleasure.
You have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
That was Robert Sheaffer. We were talking about a lot of bizarre things in the world of ufology. My latest book is, of course, Leveland, which is an examination of the Leveland case and these ideas of electromagnetic effects, which are a suggestion of the UFO interacting with the environment and that sort of thing. And I took a lesson from some of the skeptics. So one of the things Robert brought up, and checked out some of the people to see if the information was as accurate as it could be. But it also is a compendium of a lot of different electromagnetic cases reported over the years, and examination of how the Condon Committee treated that kind of a phenomenon. I also did the UFOs in the Deep State, which was a look at the history, I guess, of ufology and how it has been manipulated in various quarters, from the government to even the private UFO organizations and the skeptics and that sort of thing. The blog is, of course, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I want to thank you all for tuning in, listening to the program here. If you have ideas or people you'd like to hear or see on the program, send me a note through my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I will be back in 167 hours with more on UFOs. So thank you for tuning in.